The cold metal walls of the UCS Defiance hummed with the sound of overworked engines as Captain Jake Morrison stared at the message on his screen. Another delay in medical supplies. Another excuse from the Coalition about why humans always came. Last, his weathered hands gripped the edge of his command chair as he read the words that had become too familiar over the past months. Jake had been mining the asteroid fields of Sector 7 for 3 years now. His crew of 43 humans worked 18 hours a day, pulling rare crystals from floating rocks while the Coalition species enjoyed 8-hour shifts and full medical coverage. The Zephyrians who ran the operation made sure to remind them daily that humans were lucky to have jobs at all. Down in the medical bay, his wife Lisa lay dying from a simple infection that any Coalition citizen would have cured in hours. The antibiotics she needed sat in warehouses on Coalition worlds, marked for more important species. Jake closed his eyes and tried to push away the rage that had been building inside him for months. The bridge door opened, and his first officer, Ryan, walked in with the daily reports. Ryan had lost weight over the past weeks, like most of the crew. Their food rations had been cut again to make room for Zephyrian luxury items on the supply ships. The man who had once been strong enough to work the heavy mining equipment now looked hollow and tired. "Captain, we just got word from the mining platform on asteroid 47, Ryan said quietly. 3 more workers collapsed today. The Coalition supervisor said they were being lazy and cut their rations in half. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Those workers had families back on Earth, children who depended on the money. Their parents sent home from these hellish mining operations. Now they would get even less because alien overseers thought human suffering was amusing. He remembered when the Coalition had first contacted Earth 200 years ago. The history books called it humanity's greatest day when advanced aliens welcomed them into galactic society. What those books did not mention was how quickly that welcome had turned into chains. Humans became the workforce that kept Coalition. Worlds running while never being allowed to truly join their society. On the communication screen, another message appeared. This one made Jake's blood turn to ice. Lisa's medical request had been denied again. The Coalition Medical Board had decided that her treatment would be better used on a Zephyrian pet that had eaten something bad. Pet was worth more than his. Wife's life. Jake stood up slowly and walked to the viewport that looked out at the endless field of asteroids. Each rock represented months of backbreaking labor for his crew. The crystals they pulled from these floating mountains powered Coalition cities and funded their military expansion. Human sweat and blood had built half the Coalition's empire, and in return, they were treated like animals. The door to the bridge opened again, and Dr. Patricia Young entered. Her face told Jake everything he needed to know before she spoke. Patricia had been trying to save Lisa for weeks with the limited supplies they had on board. She was one of the best doctors in human space, but even she could not work miracles without proper medicine. "Jake, I am sorry," Patricia said softly. "Without the antibiotics, there is nothing more I can do. She has maybe 6 hours left." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. 6 hours to say goodbye to the woman who had followed him to the edge of space because she believed in their future together. 6 hours before the Coalition's deliberate cruelty claimed another human life. He nodded slowly and headed toward the medical bay. Lisa was awake when he entered, though her skin had taken on the gray color that meant the infection was winning. She smiled when she saw him, the same smile that had convinced him to marry her. 15 years ago on Earth, even dying, she was more beautiful than any alien princess the Coalition could produce. "The supply ship came today," she whispered. "Did we get the medicine?" Jake could not bring himself to tell her the truth. Instead, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. They both knew the answer from his expression. Lisa had always been able to read him like an open book. She closed her eyes and let out a small sigh. "Promise me something, Jake," she said after a moment. "Promise me that Lisa Morrison will not die for nothing. Promise me that someday human children will not have to beg aliens for the right to live." Those words would stay with Jake for the rest of his life. He held his wife's hand as her breathing became slower and more labored. Outside their small medical bay, the universe continued spinning as if nothing important was happening. Coalition ships moved between the stars, carrying supplies to species that mattered, while humans died in the dark corners of space. Lisa passed away at 0347 hours. Ship time. Jake sat beside her body for an hour, memorizing her face and thinking about the promises he had made. When he finally left the medical bay, something fundamental had changed inside him. The part of Jake Morrison that had tried to work within the coalition system had died with his wife. On the bridge, his crew waited for orders. They had all loved Lisa, and her death hit them almost as hard as it hit Jake. These 43 people had become his family over years of dangerous work in hostile space. They trusted him to keep them safe and get them home to their own families. Someday, Jake looked at the navigation display showing their current course toward the Coalition Depot, where they were supposed to deliver their cargo. Months of work represented by tons of rare crystals that would make coalition leaders richer, while the humans who died to obtain them were forgotten. The same crystals that could have been traded for the medicine that would have saved Lisa. Thought about Director Helen Carter back on Earth, trying to run a human government under coalition oversight. He thought about the human colonies scattered across the galaxy, all following coalition rules that seemed designed to keep humanity weak and desperate. He thought about the children being taken away for coalition education programs and never returning home. But mostly, he thought about Lisa's final words. Human children should not have to beg for the right to live. Jake walked to the navigation console and began entering new coordinates. Not toward the coalition depot, but toward Earth. Toward home. Toward whatever remained of human dignity and strength. "Captain, what are our orders?" Ryan asked. Jake activated the ship's communication system and set it to broadcast on all human frequencies across the sector. His voice was steady when he spoke, though inside he felt like his world was ending and beginning at the same time. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the UCS Defiance. We have spent too many years following orders that only bring us pain and death. Today, that ends. No more." The message from Captain Jake Morrison spread across human space like fire through dry grass. Within hours, communication networks that had been quiet for years suddenly came alive with voices that had forgotten how to hope. In mining stations and transport ships, in orbital platforms and planetary colonies, humans heard those two simple words and felt something stir inside them that had been sleeping for too long. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Martinez was standing in the command center of Kepler Station when Morrison's broadcast reached him. Around him, coalition officers from 3 different species worked at their posts, confident that their human subordinates would continue following orders without question. Steve had been following those orders for 8 years, watching his own people suffer while he climbed the military ranks. The communication came through on the emergency frequency that all human ships monitored. Steve listened to Morrison's words while pretending to review supply reports. When the message ended, he looked around the command center and saw that several other humans had heard it too. Their faces showed the same mixture of fear and excitement that Steve felt in his chest. 2 hours later, Steve received new orders from Coalition High Command. A group of human civilians in the mining district had been caught talking about Morrison's message. They were accused of planning rebellion and sentenced to immediate execution. Steve was ordered to carry out the sentence personally to show other humans what happened to troublemakers. Steve had carried out similar orders before. He had told himself it was necessary to keep the peace and protect the larger human population. But as he walked toward the detention center with a squad of coalition soldiers, Morrison's words kept echoing in his mind. No more. The prisoners were waiting in a small room with concrete walls. 12 humans, including 2 women and an old man who reminded Steve of his grandfather. They looked up at him with the tired resignation that had become common among their people. They expected to die because experience had taught them that humans always paid the price for others. Angered, Steve raised his weapon and aimed it at the coalition officer beside him instead of the prisoners. The alien's shock lasted only a second before Steve's shot ended his life. The other coalition soldiers in the room had just enough time to realize what was happening before Steve and the human prisoners turned their weapons on them. Within minutes, Steve was broadcasting his own message across the planetary communication system. Kepler Station was now under human control. Any coalition personnel who wanted to leave peacefully could do so, but the days of treating humans like slaves were over. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human workers across the planet stopped what they were doing and looked to their overseers with new eyes. Some aliens fled immediately, smart enough to recognize the change in the air. Others tried to maintain control and found themselves facing people who had nothing left to lose. On Earth, Director Helen Carter was sitting in her office when both messages reached her. She had spent 15 years running the human colonial administration, trying to protect her people while working within a system designed to crush them. Every day brought new coalition demands that made human life a little bit harder and a little bit cheaper. Helen's assistant knocked on her door and entered with a worried expression. The young woman had been working late, monitoring communications from across human space. What she had discovered made Helen's blood run cold. The coalition had decided that humanity was becoming too troublesome. Secret orders had gone out to all sector commanders to begin what they called population reduction protocols. It was genocide disguised as resource management, designed to cut the human population by half over the next 5 years. But the order that made Helen's hands shake was more personal. Her daughter Amy had been selected for immediate transfer to a coalition research facility. The official reason was advanced education, but Helen knew the truth. Amy would disappear like thousands of other human children before her, used for experiments or turned into willing slaves through surgical and chemical modification. That Helen looked out her window at the Earth that had become a prison for her people. Coalition ships filled the sky, monitoring every communication and movement. The planet that had once launched humans to the stars was now a carefully controlled farm where they bred workers for alien masters. She thought about Amy, only 16, years old and full of dreams about exploring the galaxy. In 2 days, coalition agents would come to take her away. Helen would be expected to smile and thank them for the opportunity they were giving her daughter. Instead, Helen activated her security codes and began downloading every piece of classified information she could access. Military positions, supply routes, communication protocols, and most importantly, the complete files on what really happened to human children in coalition educational programs. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes was working the night shift at the coalition Central Research Facility when she received an urgent message to report to Laboratory 7. She had been working at the facility for 3 years, believing she was helping to develop new medical treatments for all species. The security clearance required for Laboratory 7 suggested she was being promoted to more important work. What Elizabeth found in Laboratory 7 made her stomach turn. Dozens of human children lay on medical tables, their bodies connected to machines that monitored their vital signs. Some were conscious, but their eyes were empty, staring at nothing. Others had been surgically modified in ways that made Elizabeth's medical training scream in horror. Coalition scientist in charge of the laboratory explained the project with casual pride. They were creating the perfect servants by combining human intelligence with absolute obedience. The children's memories were being selectively erased and replaced with programmed loyalty to their future owners. Their bodies were being modified to better serve alien physiologies and preferences. Elizabeth pretended to take notes while her mind raced. These children had parents somewhere who believed their sons and daughters were receiving advanced education. Instead, they were being turned into biological machines designed to serve alien masters without question or resistance. When her shift ended, Elizabeth returned to her quarters and began copying every file she could access. Medical records, surgical procedures, psychological conditioning protocols, and most damning of all, the complete list of human children who had been processed through the facility over the past decade. Across human space, more voices joined the growing rebellion. Ship captains changed course and refused to deliver their cargo to Coalition depots. Military officers turned their weapons on alien commanders. Civilian workers walked away from their jobs and began organizing resistance cells. The UCS Defiance had become the center of a growing fleet as other ships answered Morrison's call. What started as one mining vessel had grown to dozens of ships in just 3 days. Each vessel brought news of more uprisings and more humans who had decided they would rather die fighting than live on their knees. Dot Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the tactical display show friendly contacts throughout the sector. For the first time since Lisa's death, he felt something that might have been hope. The spark had been lit, and now it was spreading faster than the Coalition could contain it. 6 weeks after Morrison's first broadcast, the rebellion had spread to over 40 human worlds. The Coalition response was swift and brutal. 3 entire colonies were destroyed from orbit as examples to others who might think about resistance. The images of burning cities and vaporized settlements were broadcast across all human territories with a simple message: submit or die. But the Coalition had made a critical mistake. They thought fear would break human spirit the way it had broken other species. Instead, the destruction of those colonies only made more humans angry. Each burned world created thousands of new rebels who had nothing left to lose. General Nathan Brooks sat in a hidden command center built inside an asteroid in the Vega system. 3 months ago, he had been a Coalition military advisor, helping alien commanders understand human psychology. Now he was the strategic mind behind humanity's growing resistance movement. The irony was not lost on him that his knowledge of Coalition tactics was now being used to destroy them. Nathan studied the holographic display showing Coalition fleet movements across the galaxy. The aliens had superior technology and overwhelming firepower, but they fought like they always had, with massive formations and predictable strategies. Humans were different. 200,000 years of evolution had taught them to be adaptable, creative, and resourceful when facing impossible odds. The first test of Nathan's new strategy came at the Proxima Station Supply Depot. Coalition forces expected a direct assault from Morrison's growing fleet. Instead, they found their base infiltrated by maintenance workers who had been planning the attack for weeks. The humans disabled the station's defenses from the inside, while Morrison's ships appeared to attack empty space, drawing the Coalition fleet away from the real target. By the time the Coalition commanders realized they had been tricked, Proxima Station was in human hands, along with enough supplies to feed the rebellion for months. More importantly, the victory proved that humans could outthink their oppressors, despite being outgunned. Engineer Maya Rodriguez had been working on Coalition ships for 8 years, learning every detail of their technology. When the rebellion started, she became one of Nathan's most valuable assets. Maya understood that humans could not win by building bigger guns or stronger shields. They had to be smarter, faster, and more unpredictable than their enemies. in a secret facility hidden in the atmosphere of a gas giant. Maya and her team worked with salvaged Coalition equipment to create something new. They called them Ghost. Ships, vessels that could mask their energy signatures and appear as space debris on enemy sensors. The first Ghost ship was barely held together with spare parts and human ingenuity, but it could do something no Coalition vessel could imagine. The Ghost ship's first mission was against a Coalition patrol squadron near the Centauri system. The aliens detected what appeared to be a small asteroid drifting through space. When their ships moved to investigate, the asteroid suddenly came alive with weapons fire. 3 Coalition cruisers were destroyed before they could send a distress signal. Maya's Ghost ships began appearing throughout Coalition space, striking without warning and disappearing before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The psychological effect was devastating. Coalition commanders could no longer trust their sensors or feel safe anywhere in what they had once considered secure territory. Captain Morrison's fleet had grown from 1 mining ship to over 200 vessels of all sizes. They operated from hidden bases in asteroid fields and dead systems, never staying in one place long enough for Coalition forces to track them down. The Free Human Armada, as they called themselves, conducted lightning raids on Coalition supply lines and liberated human prisoners wherever they found them. Each successful mission brought more ships and volunteers to Morrison's cause. Merchant captains who had spent years hauling cargo for alien masters now used their knowledge of trade routes to guide attack fleets. Former Coalition military officers brought tactical expertise and inside information about enemy weaknesses. Dr. Patricia Young had established a medical research center on a small moon in an abandoned system. Her work focused on understanding Coalition biology, not to create weapons of mass destruction, but to develop tactical advantages that could help level the playing field. Patricia had seen too much death to ever become someone who killed for pleasure, but she was willing to do whatever was necessary to protect human lives. Her breakthrough came when she discovered that Zephyrian neural systems were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. A targeted pulse could cause temporary paralysis without permanent damage. The discovery led to the development of neural disruptors that could disable Coalition troops without killing them, allowing human forces to capture enemy positions with minimal casualties. The Coalition's response to these new tactics was to increase security around their most important facilities and begin using automated defense systems that could not be affected by neural disruptors. But each countermeasure they developed seemed to inspire new innovations from human engineers and scientists who refused to accept that any problem was unsolvable. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Martinez had become the leader of human special forces operations behind enemy lines. His teams infiltrated Coalition command centers, sabotaged military installations, and rescued human prisoners from labor camps. The success rate of these missions was remarkable, but it came at a cost that Steve felt in his bones every day, that too many good people had died in the fight for freedom. Young men and women who should have been starting families and building peaceful lives were instead sacrificing themselves to break the chains that bound their species. Steve kept a small notebook with the names of everyone who had died under his command, and he read it every night to remind himself why the fight mattered. The turning point came when Steve's team infiltrated the Coalition Communication Center on Rigel 7. Instead of simply destroying the facility, they uploaded a virus created by Maya's technical team that gave humans access to Coalition military networks. For the first time since the rebellion began, human commanders could see enemy fleet movements in real time. The information advantage changed everything. Coalition forces found themselves walking into traps and arriving at battle sites where human fleets were already waiting. Supply convoys disappeared without trace, while their escort ships searched empty space. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Coalition leadership began to realize They were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. On Earth, Director Helen Carter used her remaining authority to coordinate resistance cells across the planet. The Coalition had not yet realized how much classified information she had stolen, but Helen knew her time was running out. Soon they would discover her betrayal, and she would join the thousands of other humans who had disappeared into Coalition detention centers. But every day she remained free was another day to pass intelligence to the rebellion and help more humans escape Coalition control. Helen's sacrifice would not be wasted if it helped humanity win their freedom. 18 months after Morrison's first act of defiance, the war had spread across the entire galaxy. What began as a human rebellion had inspired other oppressed species to rise against Coalition tyranny. The Corvan merchant clans declared independence and offered their trade networks to support the rebellion. The aquatic depth dwellers emerged from their ocean worlds to fight alongside human fleets. Even some young Zephyrians began questioning the empire their ancestors had built on the suffering of others. Admiral Claire Thompson stood on the bridge of the UCS Retribution, watching her mixed fleet of 3,000 ships prepare for the Chung, largest battle in galactic history. 6 months ago, she had been a transport captain hauling supplies between human colonies. Now she commanded vessels from a dozen different species, all united by their desire for freedom from Coalition oppression. The promotion from captain to admiral had come after Claire led a brilliant tactical victory at the Battle of Wolf Station. Outnumbered 5-1, she had used the station's own defensive systems against the Coalition fleet by reprogramming their automated weapons to target Zephyrian ship signatures. The victory had been so complete that Coalition commanders still studied the battle recordings, trying to understand how they had been defeated. Claire's flagship was a converted mining vessel like Morrison's original ship, but Maya Rodriguez's engineers had transformed it into something the Coalition had never seen before. The Retribution carried weapons that could punch through any known shield system and armor, that could absorb energy blasts and redirect them back at attackers. Most importantly, it carried the hopes of billions of beings who dreamed of living free. The Coalition's response to these victories had been predictably brutal. Emperor Zak Thul himself had ordered the deployment of planet-killer weapons against human worlds. The destruction of New Australia and its 2 billion inhabitants had pushed humanity past any consideration of mercy. This was no longer about freedom or justice. It was about survival and making sure that those responsible for genocide faced the consequences of their actions. Commander Ryan Torres had been promoted to lead the elite human commando units that struck at Coalition leadership wherever they could be found. His teams moved through enemy territory like ghosts, appearing in Coalition command centers and government buildings to eliminate the beings responsible for ordering attacks on civilian populations. Ryan's most successful mission had been the assassination of General Vexton, the Zephyrian officer who had personally ordered the destruction of New Australia. The Coalition leader had been attending a strategy meeting on his heavily defended flagship when Ryan's team materialized in the conference room using experimental teleportation technology. The psychological impact of the attack was enormous, proving that no Coalition leader was safe, no matter how many guards surrounded them. Dr. Helen Carter had finally been discovered by Coalition security forces on Earth, but not before she completed her most important work. Using liberated Coalition scientists who had joined the rebellion, Helen had made a breakthrough discovery about Zephyrian neural architecture. She developed a transmission frequency that could induce temporary paralysis in their command species, turning their technological superiority into a liability. The neural frequency weapon was first tested during the Battle of Kepler Prime, where Coalition forces had trapped a human refugee convoy. When Claire's fleet arrived to rescue the civilians, they found themselves facing a Coalition armada twice their size. The battle seemed hopeless until Helen's frequency weapon was activated. Across the Coalition fleet, Zephyrian commanders suddenly found themselves unable to move or speak. Their human and alien subordinates, who had been forced to serve through fear and intimidation, suddenly realized their oppressors were helpless. Many coalition ships immediately switched sides, while others fell into chaos as different species fought for control of the vessels. The refugee convoy was saved, but more importantly, the Coalition High Command realized they were facing an enemy that could turn their own biology against them. The fear that had once been humanity's constant companion now lived in the hearts of their former masters. Rodriguez had established hidden shipyards in 12 different systems, each one producing vessels designed specifically to fight coalition forces. Her latest creation was a new class of warship that combined human engineering creativity with technology captured from defeated enemies. These ships could operate in conditions that would destroy coalition vessels and carry weapons that defied every known law of physics. That the Ghost Ship program had evolved beyond simple stealth vessels. Maya's new ships could phase in and out of normal space, peering inside enemy formations to deliver devastating attacks before vanishing again. Coalition forces began calling them demon ships, and many alien crews refused to patrol sectors where they had been spotted. But Maya's greatest achievement was not any single weapon or ship design. She had created a manufacturing system that turned every human colony into a potential military production center. Ordinary civilians could build weapon components in their homes using plans transmitted through the rebellion's communication network. What the Coalition saw as scattered settlements of powerless humans were actually thousands of small factories working together to arm the resistance. The war's turning point came at the Battle of the Three Suns, where Admiral Thompson's combined fleet faced the massed coalition armada in a final confrontation that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The coalition had assembled over 10,000 ships from every species in their empire, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. Thompson's fleet numbered less than 4,000 vessels, but they carried something the coalition forces lacked. They fought not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in what they were fighting for. Every human, Corvin, and depth dweller in the fleet knew that defeat meant not just death, but the return of oppression for generations to come. The battle began with a massive coalition assault designed to break the rebel fleet through overwhelming firepower. Thompson's response was to divide her forces into small, highly mobile groups that struck at coalition supply ships and command vessels, while avoiding direct confrontation with their heaviest warships. Maya's ghost ships appeared throughout the coalition formation, targeting communication arrays and navigation systems. Without coordination, the massive alien fleet began to break apart into individual groups that could be defeated separately. Helen's neural frequency weapons disabled key coalition commanders at critical moments, allowing rebel forces to capture dozens of enemy vessels intact. The final phase of the battle saw Morrison himself leading a desperate assault on the Far coalition flagship carrying Emperor Sackthul, the old mining captain who had started the rebellion with a simple message of defiance, now commanded the most advanced warship in the galaxy, racing toward a confrontation that would decide whether freedom or tyranny ruled the stars. When the shooting stopped 12 hours later, the coalition fleet had been completely destroyed or captured. Emperor Sackthul was dead, killed when his flagship's bridge was breached by Morrison's boarding party. The mighty empire that had ruled the galaxy for centuries lay in ruins, broken by beings they had considered too weak to matter. As news of the victory spread across the galaxy, coalition worlds began surrendering or declaring independence. The age of oppression was ending, but humanity faced its greatest test yet. They had proven they could break chains, but now they had to prove they would not become the very thing they had fought to destroy. 5 years after the rebellion began, President Jake Morrison stood before the Galactic Assembly on the neutral world of Haven, representatives from hundreds of species had gathered to witness the signing of the Covenant of Free Worlds, a document that would forever ban slavery and oppression from civilized space. The old mining captain who had started a war with two simple words now carried the hopes of an entire galaxy on his shoulders. The victory had come at an enormous cost that Jake felt in his bones every day. Dozens of human worlds lay in ruins. Billions were dead, and the scars of war would take generations to heal. But humanity had proven something fundamental about their nature during those dark years. They could be pushed to incredible extremes, but they would never break completely. Instead, they would bend until they snapped back with devastating force. The ceremony hall was filled with beings who had never imagined they could live free from the HFY Coalition's rule. Former slave species sat beside their former masters, many of whom had joined the rebellion when they realized the true cost of their empire. Young Zephyrians who had grown up during the war looked very different from their elders, having learned that strength came from cooperation rather than domination. Admiral Claire Thompson oversaw the establishment of the new Galactic Defense Force from her headquarters on Luna Station. Her first priority was hunting down the remaining war criminals who had participated in the Coalition's worst atrocities. Justice would reach every corner of the galaxy, but it would be fair justice based on evidence and law rather than revenge. Trials were conducted openly, with representatives from all species serving as judges. Former Coalition leaders who had ordered the destruction of entire worlds faced their victims, families, and tried to explain why they had believed genocide was necessary for galactic order. Many broke down completely when confronted with the reality of what their commands had meant to real people with real lives. Some Coalition officers received mercy when evidence showed they had tried to protect civilians or had secretly helped prisoners escape. Others faced execution for crimes so terrible that no punishment seemed adequate. Claire made sure that every trial was recorded and broadcast so that future generations would understand the price of allowing tyrants to rule unchallenged. Dr. Patricia Young led the restoration project from a medical facility built in orbit around Earth. Her work focused on healing the genetic damage inflicted on enslaved populations and helping survivors of Coalition experiments rebuild their lives. The children who had been rescued from places like Laboratory 7 required years of careful treatment to undo the psychological conditioning that had been forced upon them. Patricia's greatest achievement was developing treatments that could restore memories stolen by Coalition scientists. Watching young people remember their real names and families for the first time in years reminded everyone why the war had been necessary. Every child who smiled again was proof that the suffering had not been meaningless. The medical teams also worked with former Coalition species who had suffered under their own government's rule. Many aliens had been used as test subjects for weapons and drugs that were later deployed against humans. The Empire had consumed its own people just as hungrily as it had devoured other species. Commander Ryan Torres established the Freedom Academy on a rebuilt world near the Galactic Center. The institution trained new generations of soldiers, diplomats, and scientists from all species to recognize the warning signs of tyranny before it could take root again. Students learned about the Coalition's rise to power and how ordinary people had allowed evil to flourish by staying silent. The Academy's motto was simple but powerful: never again. Ryan made sure that every graduate understood their responsibility to protect the weak and stand against oppression wherever they found it. The galaxy would have guardians who remembered the lessons learned in blood and fire. Maya Rodriguez continued her work as chief engineer for the new galactic government, but her focus had shifted from weapons of war to tools of peace. Her teams designed ships that could carry aid to disaster areas, machines that could terraform damaged worlds, and communication systems that would connect every inhabited planet in the galaxy. The ghost ship technology that had once struck fear into Coalition Hearts was converted for exploration and rescue missions. Ships that could phase through space and time now carried medical supplies to plague-stricken worlds and evacuated civilians from natural disasters. Weapons of destruction had become instruments of salvation. Jake Morrison often walked through the memorial gardens on Earth where his wife Lisa was buried. The simple stone marker bore her name in a single line. She believed in tomorrow. Around her grave, flowers from 100 different worlds bloomed in soil that had been watered with too many tears. But the gardens were not places of sadness anymore. Children from every species played among the memorial stones, their laughter, proving that Lisa's sacrifice had meaning. Human children ran alongside young Corvins and Zephyrians, all of them free to dream about futures their parents had almost been denied. The memorial walls contained millions of names representing every being who had died fighting for freedom. Jake read some of them aloud during his daily visits, making sure their stories would not be forgotten. Heroes like Helen Carter, who had died in Coalition custody, but whose intelligence work had saved countless lives. Ordinary people who had made extraordinary choices when history demanded courage. The galaxy was not perfect in the years following the war. Some worlds struggled with rebuilding, while others faced conflicts between different groups trying to establish new governments. Pirates and criminals tried to take advantage of the chaos, forcing the defense force to respond with measured strength. Democracy was messy and complicated compared to the brutal efficiency of dictatorship. But these were the problems of free people trying to build something better, not the despair of slaves accepting whatever fate their masters chose for them. Every argument in the Galactic Assembly was proof that beings had the right to disagree with their leaders. Every peaceful protest demonstrated that change could come through words rather than weapons. Jake often thought about the moment when he had decided to broadcast his message of defiance. He wondered what Lisa would think about the galaxy that had grown from her husband's grief and anger. Would she be proud of what humanity had accomplished, or would she grieve for all the lives lost in the pursuit of justice? The answer came to him one evening as he watched children playing in the memorial gardens. A young Zephyrian girl had fallen and scraped her knee while running. Without hesitation, a human boy helped her up and shared his bandage with her. Their different species meant nothing to them because they had grown up in a world where such differences were celebrated rather than used as excuses for hatred. That was Lisa's real memorial, Jake realized. Not the stone marker or the flowers, but the simple fact that children could be kind to each other without fear. Humanity had been pushed too far and had finally broken, but in breaking, they had shattered the chains that bound not just themselves, but an entire galaxy. The rebellion had ended, but the dream it fought for continued in every act of compassion and every choice to help rather than harm. They had fought not to conquer, but to free, and in their victory, they had proven that the strongest species was not the one with the biggest weapons, but the one with the biggest hearts.